In the heart of the Bavarian forest, hidden from modern maps and technology, there was once a village named Verloren. It wasn't big, just about 100 residents, living simple lives surrounded by dense, ancient trees. The village had been there for hundreds of years, tucked away in isolation, and though its existence was little known to the outside world, life in Verloren was peaceful. That is, until one night, the village vanished, completely and without a trace. The story begins with an expedition team from a nearby town. It was the summer of 1976, and rumors of Verloren's disappearance had been swirling for weeks. The local authorities dismissed them as an urban legend hoax because no one had even heard of Verloren on official records. But an elderly man, Heinrich, arrived at the police station one day with a story that chilled everyone who heard it. "I used to live there," he said, his voice shaking as he described the village. "We had crops, families, and celebrations like anywhere else. But one day, the forest around us felt different. The trees seemed to whisper in the night, and animals began fleeing from the area. We didn't understand it. According to Heinrich, strange occurrences began to escalate. People's shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long at sunset. Doors that were locked at night were found wide open the next morning. The local well, once pure, began to fill with black water, and the air smelled of sulfur. The villagers were terrified, but too isolated to seek help. They decided to leave the village, but before they could, something strange happened. Heinrich spoke of a night when the air grew thick, almost like it was alive. A low hum vibrated through the earth, shaking the trees and rattling the homes. Some villagers reported seeing strange figures lurking at the edge of the woods, their shapes impossible to describe, like moving shadows without bodies. "I was young, about 10 years old," Heinrich said. "But I'll never forget that night. The villagers woke up the next morning to find their neighbors missing, entire families gone without a sound. By dusk, half the village had vanished. Panic spread, and those who remained packed what little they could and fled into the forest. Heinrich was one of the few to make it out alive. By the time the rest of the world became aware of the situation, Verloren had completely disappeared, its people, its homes, even its foundations. When authorities arrived to investigate, all they found was a clearing. There were no buildings, no debris, no sign that a village had ever existed. The land was untouched, as if Verloren had been swallowed whole by the earth. The case of Verloren became an infamous local legend, but it remained just that, a legend, dismissed by most as a story spun from superstition. That was until the summer of 1976, when the expedition team led by a group of paranormal researchers ventured deep into the Bavarian forest to find Verloren. Armed with modern equipment, they hoped to uncover the truth behind the mysterious disappearance. They arrived at the location where the village had once stood, only to find the clearing Heinrich had described, empty, silent, and unnaturally still. The team set up camp and began their investigation, but something wasn't right. The forest was eerily quiet, no birds, no insects, no wind. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. As night fell, strange things began to happen. Equipment malfunctioned. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and the trees seemed to close in around them. One of the researchers, a man named Lucas, swore he saw figures moving between the trees, watching them from a distance. On the third night, the team heard the low hum that Heinrich had spoken of. It vibrated through the ground, rattling their tents. The air grew thick, suffocating, as the forest around them seemed to come alive. Then, one by one, the team members started to disappear. First, it was Lucas, who wandered into the trees and never returned. Then, the others vanished, leaving no trace behind. By dawn, only one researcher remained, a woman named Clara. She was found stumbling out of the forest by a group of hikers the next day, delirious and muttering about shadows and voices that whispered her name. She never spoke again about what she saw. To this day, Verloren's disappearance remains one of the most baffling mysteries in the region. No trace of the village has ever been found, and the forest remains off limits to those who know the legend. Some believe that Verloren never existed, that it was a myth born of old-world superstitions. Others believe that the village was taken by something ancient, something hidden within the forest, waiting for the next time it will strike. As for Heinrich, he disappeared a year after the expedition, leaving only a cryptic note behind. The forest remembers. Stay away from Verloren. Some say he returned to the village that vanished overnight.